Huddle Up Podcast is sponsored by Arena Eats. Log on to the website arenaeats.app, that's arenaeats.app, for the ultimate fan experience. At your favorite sports venue, Arena Eats mobile app, pre-order, express pickup, and in-seat delivery. How do you place your order? Let's look at one of the coaching situations that we had been keeping an eye on throughout the season was Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. We now know that Jim Harbaugh will be back at Michigan, a new 5-year deal, buyout much lower for Michigan, very incentively, set up so that the more they win, the more money he's going to make. So, I know there was a lot of typical reactions with this. I think Michigan is a somewhat polarizing team, Harbaugh polarizing guy, and a lot of people had some interesting comments about the decision for Michigan to bring him back. I still think this is the right call, and they had and the way they did it, especially because first off, you either had to fire him or you had to extend him because he was going into his final year. A lame duck 1-year coach in college is just going to be disastrous for recruiting. So now this tells you when you're out on the recruiting trail, look, I'm here for the next almost the next decade. I've one more year, 5 years after that, I will be here for the full time that your son is coming to play at the University of Michigan. And also I don't know that there's a coach out there right now that is going to walk in and make Michigan that much better next season. And I know, it always comes back to, well, you have to beat Ohio State. I get it. Don't get me wrong. I get it. For years, I pulled out the stat and I looked it up when Notre Dame had gone through that stretch where they only beat USC 3 times in a 13-year period. I get it. You want to beat your rivals. However, look at the scoreboard. There's not a lot of teams in the country that are beating Ohio State right now regularly. Obviously you want to win those games against Penn State. You want to win those games against Michigan State. You want to win those games if and when you play Notre Dame. That's another big one as well if you play them. So yeah, he has to be better. I'm not sitting here fully defending it, but I think this is the correct choice. And the bottom line is, if he does well and turns the team around, gets some wins over Ohio State, wins a Big Ten, goes to a playoff, Michigan looks pretty damn smart for extending him at this point. If he doesn't, it's a low buyout a year or two from now, and he's not going to see years 4 and 5 on that deal.
No, and I think when you're University of Michigan and where the program's at right now, and you look at some of the other there's some other appealing programs, some smaller schools and things where coaches are going on to bigger and better things and coordinators and the shift. And you look at where some of the job openings are, and I'm not sure on that list how appealing the Michigan job is. Obviously, at a prestigious school, it's real nice, but there's a lot of coaching vacancies in the NFL, and I know that's nothing new. But when you're looking at what candidates you're looking for and what type of candidate you're looking for, unless you were looking for like we talked about before, a burner candidate until someone else came along, I'm with you. I don't think there was anybody else really out there for him, and I was a huge proponent of just let him go. He can't do anything. And maybe I'm giving him the light of day at the end of this COVID tunnel, and hope get it back on track when things get rolling. But yeah, I don't think the leash is very long. And with that contract as big as it sounded on paper when I first saw the numbers, there's definitely some room to wiggle and a chance to make that leash a lot shorter than it looks. But while we're on the topic of college football, I just happened to scroll into my college football news, and I got a list of the current odds to win the national title next year. I'll give you 0 guesses as to who's number 1 odds. Alabama, although currently plus 300. If you want to throw a $100 bet out there on Alabama, it could take 300 home at the end of next year. But obviously, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, your top 3, Oklahoma rounding out the top 4. No surprise there. Notre Dame, those are all plus 800 or less. Notre Dame sitting at plus 4,000. So a $100 bet wins you $4,000. interesting to me. Like, there's only about 10 teams between those four and Notre Dame, but that's a lot of teams. Here's just a few of the teams ahead of Notre Dame in odds at plus 3,300. Texas, Texas A&M, and USC all favored higher. Better odds to win.
Have they seen USC under Clay Helton?
I have no idea what they're thinking there, unless
asinine.
they have a ton of people coming back. Maybe Derrick Henry's going to USC. I don't know.
Maybe.
A year of eligibility left, going back to school. I don't know. And then, of course, LSU at plus 2,500. I assume that means that they're getting more experienced. And then Georgia rounds out the other teams ahead of us.
Oh, Georgia, give me a break.
USC, by the way, that's one Pac-12 school. Another Pac-12 school, Oregon, same odds as Notre Dame at plus 4,000, along with the University of North Carolina. So I don't mind North Carolina being in the state because I feel like Notre Dame's losing some pieces. North Carolina is going to stay where they are. I think North Carolina. I don't think that.
I don't think they're playoff contenders, but that program's building, and they have Mac Brown.
Is those other teams? If the tier jump that I talked about earlier in college football is that big, it's even larger within their conferences. So the trouble is,
right? They'd have to get past
Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson have successfully made. Like, if you were going to bet on the winner of those conferences and you bet the field, that's a sucker bet.
Right.
Like, to bet the field against Clemson, Alabama, or Ohio State is just madness. Maybe Ohio State is the one that I could – for some reason, the Big Ten always has a lot of, like, weird one-loss teams that are right behind them. And with the right Big 12 Big Ten title game, occasionally you get – I feel Ohio State's the one that seems to make the most mistakes before the playoff starts of those teams. But – there's just not a lot of scenarios where those three teams aren't undefeated. The only hope that the playoff has for other teams is that one of them gets knocked off one time and needs some help to get in, and then just doesn't get that help. That's the only hope that you would have. But then in those years, the argument for 8 teams comes back, and you're like, well, if we'd gone to 8 teams, Alabama would still be there, or if we'd gone to 8 teams, Ohio State'd still be in. So I don't think there's a lot of push against 8 teams from actual fans. I feel like that's a thing. But yeah, as far as Harbaugh, we're on the same page.
Yeah, and I just look back.
Next year, we're entertaining.
I just look back at their last 2 seasons, and I mean, this is his record. These are his records at Michigan: 10-3, 10-3, 8-5, 10-3, 9-4, and then of course this year is 2-4. But I feel like you kind of give a pass on this season. You know, good or bad, but especially if it's bad. And I think a lot of those years, unfortunately, was, you know, your final loss was the bowl game, but now you're in the era where you have opt-outs, you have injuries, things like that. But his last 2 seasons, so in 2018, they lost to Notre Dame, and that was the year Notre Dame went to the college football playoff. Notre Dame went undefeated, and they lost to Ohio State, and then they lost to Florida in the Peach Bowl. And then last year, they lost to Wisconsin, Penn State, and Ohio State. And Ohio State, of course, was in the was in the playoff, and then they lost to Alabama in the Citrus Bowl. So, I mean, yes, you are losing against your best opponents, but again, you have to look at where Michigan was when he got there, where they are now. I feel like a guy who's gone 49-22 in 6 seasons, and one of those being a 2-4 season with the pandemic. I feel like that's a pretty hard thing to say that he's not doing well, that he's not succeeding. So, of course, Jim Harbaugh will be returning to the Michigan sideline next year. That's closing up the chapter. Obviously, if there's anything newsworthy in college football, we will hit that during our shows in the weeks to come. But now another coaching situation that we have been talking about for the better part of this season, of course, the Philadelphia Eagles. And what were the Eagles going to do? A lot of buzz over recent weeks about their coaching situation, and now we know that Doug Peterson is out as Eagles head coach. So Sean, I will lend the floor to you first, being the Eagles fan. But for me, when the news came through yesterday, I can't really say that I was surprised. But you're 3 seasons removed from a Super Bowl. It feels strange, but I can't honestly say I was surprised.
Well, it's the way of the era, I think. What have you done for me lately? And unfortunately, it wasn't a situation where the Eagles weren't just winning Super Bowls. This year especially, but even last year, getting into the playoffs, it's not like they looked that impressive. He kind of snuck in out of a weak division again. Had to really scrap. In both years, a very injury-ridden team. Is that a fault of a head coach? I don't know how. I mean, I'm not on an NFL sidelines. I don't know if the head coach has a lot to do with player conditioning. I know the Eagles run one of the more grueling camps in professional football, and I don't know that was able to take place this year. But I mean, we're looking at 5 years. His whole regime has been an injury-ridden. Even the Super Bowl run that year was an injury-ridden year.
And that, I mean, not just Carson, which is a kind of a freak injury. You're talking guys who have a lot of tissue injuries and muscle injuries, stuff like that. That those things pile up year to year. Huddle Up Podcast is sponsored by Arena Eats. Log on to the website arenaeats.app. That's arenaeats.app for the ultimate fan experience. At your favorite sports venue, Arena Eats mobile app, pre-order, express pickup, and in-seat delivery. How do you place your order?
Yeah, and I think it's if it's not his fault or in any way, shape, or form, then it's unfortunate. But at the same time, it's got to look competitive. And I think the issue is when you have when you sold the world and your city and the league on the next man up mentality and the whole we're all we got and we're all we need, and it worked. I will always be grateful for Doug Peterson. I will always be grateful for the staff he had put together. But I mean, let's be honest. The coordinators and the assistant coaches that he had on that Super Bowl team were probably about as good as I've ever seen assembled on a sideline, at least in Philadelphia, at least since Andy Reid was there. And a lot of those guys, were connected to Peterson via Andy Reid. I mean, a lot of those guys, had either played for or coached with either of those guys. And I mean, you're still seeing it. Frank Reich obviously put up a good showing. Coached the first team to ever lose while putting up 450 yards and no turnovers against Buffalo this past weekend. And I think Reich's got a bright future ahead of him, and obviously some other former Eagles coaches, whether before or since Doug Peterson was hired, are still very alive as assistant and head coaches in the NFL playoffs. And I don't know. I think it was just a scenario where does the move in Week 17 to bench Jalen Hurts, really come into play? I think we live in a world where the media really and social media really does a lot to push public opinion. But I don't know that Jeff Lurie has seemed like the kind of guy that would let that push it over the edge. I'd like to believe that, especially knowing he planned on, getting some reps in, for some guys to begin with, and knowing that it probably helped your situation from a draft perspective. I don't see that being the end cause. I know they had a meeting scheduled where they were talking about the future of the team, and obviously a huge part of that probably involved Carson Wentz. So I think that's an interesting play going forward, because I was under the assumption that, Peterson would be there, Wentz won't. I think there's a chance that Peterson's not there and neither is Wentz. And from a cap and a franchise perspective, maybe that's the right play. Maybe you leave it up to the next coach. I don't know. But a lot of question marks as to the reason behind it. But I have a feeling that Lurie had a vision and Peterson had a vision, and those visions just did not align. Maybe Peterson wanted certain coaches with him and Lurie didn't. Maybe they wanted to do some certain things with the draft and they had different opinions there. And they decided to just go separate ways. But Doug Peterson will always be remembered. Doug Peterson will be in the Eagles Hall of Fame for sure. And I hope he has some success elsewhere. And, obviously any coach that's won a Super Bowl has a chance at that Canton jacket. Well, and I mean, he's going to land somewhere, and not saying he's going to go somewhere. Or a strong rumor right now. Like the Jets.
I've heard that. I mean, if I'm him, I probably want to go to Los Angeles, and you have a great offensive setup there. If you can get a defensive coach and build a defense with the Chargers, you have a lot of pieces there to build on. But he's going to land somewhere. If
you also have expectations.
I mean, do you though? You're the team that time forgets in Los Angeles.
That's a good point. Yeah, I guess so.
You know, like everybody knows the Rams. Nobody even remembers the. Like you could probably ask 1,000 people on the streets of LA, and they probably couldn't tell you the name of the second team. And
they couldn't tell you what season football's played it.
Exactly. So, I think the Jets there's more expectation. Than there. I mean, you know how to. If you've already coached in Philly,
maybe what you're looking for with the Jets, there's more hope. Like there's a fan base that still holds out a lot of hope that someday it's going to.
Yeah, the Chargers just don't have a fan base.
Chargers are like, who cares?
I mean, we joked about but before this season that the Chargers brass is probably like, great that I can't allow fans in here because that stadium's going to look silly with only about 350 people. So. The pandemic was a great thing for the Chargers. But yeah, I mean, he's going to land somewhere. But if I'm the Eagles, you kind of got to get ahead of this quarterback situation because otherwise you're going to have a new coach walking into a quarterback controversy. So I don't know if you're bringing Carson back, if you're going to operate with this 2-quarterback system, if you're looking to move Hurts or if you're looking to move Wentz. But I think that's going to be the one of the big keys to the Eagles offseason is what exactly is your decision here at the quarterback position, because it seemed to be, like we said, Wentz was going to be gone, Doug was going to be there because they kind of had this fractured relationship. Now with Peterson gone, I feel like there's all options on the table, but I think they have to make a choice.
Well, and I think if I'm Carson Wentz, and I was ready to leave with Doug Peterson at the helm. And I can't stand the idea of being a backup ever, or even the possibility of being a backup. And I'm better than that, and I know I am, and whatever his stance is. If that's really his stance, and his stance has nothing to do with Peterson, and I'm talking just the chance that you're a backup quarterback, and you were going to push for a trade before, I would personally still be pushing for a trade, because whoever comes in watched you whine to the media. Whoever it was watched you in the first however many games and watched Jalen Hurts. And I'm not going to lie to you, with the evolution of the league and where the league's going, if you're getting in a coordinator now, one of the finalists, at least from an Eagles perspective, as a rumor, is the offensive coordinator from Tennessee, who does at the present like to run a lot of play action, utilize the running game, and if that's the case. Maybe Wentz is his preferred option, and maybe that's the goal. But if you're going to leave it up to the head coach and say, well, which guy do you want? Then, are you considering trading Jalen Hurts? And I just wonder what the odds are. It's hard to get rid of a guy with that much talent on a rookie contract, especially
when you're going to be rebuilding. Situation. And let's be honest, I think the Eagles are closer to a rebuild than a contender. So it feels like
I'd put him somewhere in the middle of the pack on that.
Oh, sure.
I feel like the Eagles have enough quality pieces.
But they're aged.
The issue is going to be, who's going to stay and go. Obviously, from a wide receiver perspective, you got to regroup. And I think there's a strong chance the Eagles try to move up even from where they are. And maybe Wentz or someone like that is a piece in that trade or that puzzle. But I think there's a chance they try to move ahead. Because I wouldn't be surprised if they're not thinking offensive line, which I couldn't fault them for thinking. I feel like your pick's a little high, a little low to be thinking best offensive lineman, and a little high to be thinking next best. So I would like to see him make it.
Unless the receiver from Alabama is still there at 6. I don't know that he will be.
Or maybe they move up and just draft a third quarterback and just throw us all into a tailspin.
I'd be fine with that.
Fields falls and they're like, gotta take him.
Gotta get that quarterback.
You want the quarterback of the future here.
Well, and if you want the quarterback of the future, you want it to come from Ohio State. That we know is a fact.
That's what I've in my time as a college and NFL football fan. But I just think if you're Carson Wentz, like if the risk of not starting, because I think that risk is still going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to come into a camp. You're going to have to prove yourself. And you're going to have to be aware that if that competition, even if you win in the preseason and you start week one,
that fan base has already seen Jalen Hurts.
And let's pretend that it's close. If Jalen Hurts has a good one, but they choose you, your leash is short. It's not something, and maybe he's driven by that. He's a competitive guy. That'd be awesome. But I still see in most scenarios from where the Eagles are and where their cap is, if Carson Wentz is willing to reshuffle his deal and get some wiggle room for a trade to go somewhere where he'll definitely play, I'm still thinking about shopping him. And
yeah,
I'm still one of the believers that thinks right now Carson Wentz is still a more talented quarterback than Jalen Hurts. I don't care what people say. I think he's got better arm strength. I think he's a smarter quarterback. I think he computes the game faster and better. The trouble is it just hasn't, for one reason or another, whether it's Peterson or someone else, it hasn't transcended to performance on the field. And maybe a change of scenery is the best thing that could happen for him. And I know there's a lot of teams that aren't going to be in a position to draft one of these 3 or 4 proverbial hypothetical NFL caliber quarterbacks that are going to be looking to find their guy elsewhere, maybe in Indianapolis or New England. Obviously Jacksonville should have their guy.
Jacksonville should. New York might.
Yeah, and so you just never know, who's going to do what with whom, and but I think there is a market for Carson Wentz if you want to move him, and there's definitely a market for Jalen Hurts if you're choosing Carson Wentz and want to move on. But I don't know how you keep both. I feel like you said.
Yeah, I feel like you can't.
Have a controversy like that going into a new coach's tenure.
They always say if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any. Huddle Up Podcast is sponsored by Arena Eats. Log on to the website arenaeats.app, that's arenaeats.app, for the ultimate fan experience. At your favorite sports venue, Arena Eats mobile app, pre-order, express pickup, and in-seat delivery. How do you place your order?